The sky over Vientiane didn't darken slowly. It collapsed. One moment, the afternoon was ordinary. Street vendors, school children, the low hum of a city moving through its Tuesday routine. Then, just after 4 o'clock, something fell from the clouds that no one in the Sikottabong and Naksaithong districts had seen in years. Not rain, not wind. Ice traveling at tremendous speed, striking rooftops, vehicles, and open ground with a sound witnesses described as a continuous explosion that didn't stop for 35 minutes. This is what a hailstorm looks like when the atmosphere above Southeast Asia loses its balance. And what happened in Laos on March 22nd, 2026, is still being measured, because the damage, according to early relief reports, is still getting worse. The storm arrived without adequate warning. Laos has limited early warning infrastructure in its rural and semi-urban zones, and the convective system that produced this event built rapidly over the mountainous terrain north of Vientiane, the same terrain that by its very geography acts as a natural engine for hail formation. When warm, moisture-laden air is forced upward by highland ridges, it cools, condenses, and in the right conditions, begins cycling water droplets into the upper atmosphere where they freeze, accumulate layers of ice, and eventually become too heavy to stay suspended. What fell on Vientiane that afternoon was reported as golf ball to softball-sized hail, stones large enough to punch through roofing, crack solar panels, and leave vehicles dented beyond quick repair. Some social media accounts reported even larger stones, though those figures come from unverified sources and must be treated with caution. What is not in dispute is what those stones did when they landed. Rooftops punctured, solar panels cracked through, vehicles dented beyond quick repair. And across multiple villages in the Sikottabong and Naksaithong districts, the structures least equipped to absorb impact, thatched and corrugated metal roofs common in rural and lower-income housing, took the worst of it. By the time the storm passed, the confirmed count placed more than 5,400 homes across 17 villages in varying states of damage. Schools reported structural harm. At least one temple, a center of daily community life in Lao culture, sustained visible damage. A village administrative office was struck. The human architecture of an entire district, built over decades, maintained on modest budgets, had been tested in 35 minutes and found vulnerable. But that's only part of the story. To understand why a hailstorm in Laos carries consequences that extend far beyond broken roofing, you have to understand what kind of country absorbs this kind of hit. Laos is a landlocked nation in Southeast Asia, bordered by Thailand, Vietnam, China, Myanmar, and Cambodia. Its economy remains one of the least industrialized in the region. A significant portion of the population depends on subsistence agriculture, rice cultivation, vegetable farming, small-scale livestock, and that economy exists almost entirely outdoors, exposed to exactly the kind of atmospheric violence that struck on March 22nd. When large hail falls on a rice paddy or a vegetable plot at a critical point in the growing cycle, the loss is not abstract. It is a family's food supply. It is income that will not arrive. It is a calculation made at a kitchen table about what the next 3 months will look like and whether the numbers still work. Crop damage was confirmed in rural areas surrounding Vientiane, though precise agricultural loss estimates remain difficult to verify in the immediate aftermath of an event like this. The farming communities in Vientiane province and in the broader central Lao lowland belt are entering a period when pre-monsoon storms are most likely to interfere with crops. The timing of this storm placed it squarely in that window of maximum agricultural vulnerability. The meteorological mechanics that produced the storm are, in one sense, entirely normal for this part of the world. Northern and central Laos experience hailstorms roughly 1 to 2 times per dry season, the period running from November through April, primarily driven by convective activity over mountainous terrain. The highlands of Shankhawang province and the ridgelines flanking the Vientiane plain create natural updraft conditions that, when combined with the right atmospheric moisture and instability, generate exactly the kind of deep convective cells capable of producing large hail. What made March 22nd different was the concentration and intensity of those conditions over a populated area. Hailstorms in Laos more commonly dissipate over forested highland zones or sparsely populated agricultural land. When the cell tracks over districts like Sikottabong and Naksaithong, home to thousands of families living in structures not engineered to deflect ice projectiles, the human cost multiplies fast. Wind gusts accompanying the storm were reported at 50 to 60 kilometers per hour. That is not, by global standards, an extreme wind speed. But in combination with large hail falling at terminal velocity, those winds altered the angle of impact, driving ice stones horizontally into walls, windows, and exposed surfaces that vertical falling hail would have missed. The storm did not just fall on Vientiane. In some sense, it ran through it. Yet what comes next could be even worse. History in this region is not reassuring. A hailstorm damaged communities in Luang Prabang province in what government records describe as a March event, striking 2 villages in Vientiane district and leaving damage of over 300 million kip. That event drew attention from international relief organizations, including ReliefWeb, the humanitarian information portal operated by the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs. Before that, in prior years, comparable storms have affected hundreds of households across northern and central Laos, numbers that, set against the more than 5,000 families now reported affected in this latest event, suggest a measurable escalation in either storm intensity, population exposure, or both. These are not isolated anomalies. They are a pattern. Southeast Asia sits at the intersection of several converging atmospheric pressures. The region's wet and dry seasons have always been dynamic, but climate researchers and regional meteorological agencies have documented increasing variability in the timing, intensity, and geographic distribution of convective storm events across the Mekong basin. Laos, lacking the meteorological monitoring density of its neighbors Thailand and Vietnam, is particularly vulnerable to being caught off guard by systems that develop quickly over terrain that doesn't lend itself to easy radar coverage. The 1946 hailstorm that may have affected agricultural communities in southern China and the northern highlands of what was then French Indochina provides a distant but instructive historical mirror, though records from that period are fragmentary and difficult to verify with precision. What those records may suggest is that the mountain geography separating southern China from northern Laos has funneled storm energy in consistent patterns for generations. The communities living in those valleys were aware of hail. They were not always prepared for its extremes. In more recent memory, the monsoon season of 2017 brought a sequence of severe thunderstorm events through the Vientiane plain that damaged infrastructure and flooded agricultural lowlands. Relief agencies noted at the time that response capacity in Laos was stretched thin, not because of government unwillingness, but because of the sheer geographic scale of the country relative to its emergency response resources. A nation of roughly 8 million people spread across terrain ranging from river delta to highland plateau faces an inherent challenge: getting help to people quickly when roads wash out, when bridges are limited, and when communications in rural zones remain patchy. That challenge has not been fully resolved, and it is the same challenge now staring at relief coordinators in Vientiane. And now, scientists and relief organizations fear history may be repeating itself. The government of Laos moved quickly by regional standards. According to reports corroborated by community organizations on the ground, relief distribution began within days of the March 22nd storm. The figure reported in relief documentation is approximately 1.4 billion Lao kip, equivalent to roughly $65,000 US, distributed to affected families in the form of food supplies, mosquito nets, and essential household items. Government teams were also reported to be coordinating structural repairs, though the scale of that work across more than 5,000 damaged homes, schools, and community buildings will take far longer than an emergency relief package to address. $65,000 spread across thousands of families averages to a figure that deserves to sit in the air for a moment, not as an indictment, but as a measurement of the gap between what a storm takes away and what an emergency response can return in its immediate aftermath. In a country where household incomes in rural areas can fall below $2 per day, that support represents more than symbolic assistance. But it does not rebuild a roof. It does not replace a crop cycle. It does not repair the temple where a community gathers to process grief. The Laos Department of Meteorology and Hydrology, the primary government body responsible for weather monitoring and disaster alert coordination, has been tracking the aftermath. In the days following the storm, their forecasting models, cross-referenced with data from the Japan Meteorological Agency and the European Center for Medium-Range Weather Forecasts, indicated stabilizing conditions over the affected region. The risk of further significant hail in the immediate term was assessed as low, low, with scattered thunderstorms possible through early April, but without the deep convective intensity of the March 22nd event. The Himawari 9 satellite, operated by the Japan Meteorological Agency and covering the Asia-Pacific region with high-resolution imagery, showed no active severe weather systems over Laos in the days immediately following the storm. That is, in the narrow meteorological sense, reassuring. But weather in the pre-monsoon window and the conditions that produced March 22nd's event, moisture, instability, highland uplift, have not disappeared. They are seasonal features of the Lao atmosphere. They will return, because what happens next depends not only on the weather, but on the infrastructure built to survive it. The structural vulnerability of rural Lao housing is not a new discovery. Relief organizations, development agencies, and Lao government planners have documented for decades the exposure of thatched and light corrugated metal roofing to storm damage. These materials are not chosen because they are safe. They are chosen because they are affordable, locally available, and fast to build with. In a country still developing its construction standards and building code enforcement, and in rural areas where formal construction oversight is minimal, the gap between what the atmosphere can produce and what a roof can withstand remains dangerously wide. That gap is visible in the damage maps now being assembled from the Sikotabong and Naksaithong districts. It is visible in the count of schools needing repair before children can safely return. It is visible in the image of a temple, a building meant to outlast generations, sitting open to the sky where its roof used to be. What no model can fully predict is where exactly the next system will concentrate. The highlands of Xianghuang province to the northeast of Vientiane, long identified as a primary hail generation zone for central Laos, remain active through the pre-monsoon period. Bolakamse province to the south and east sits in a belt where convective cells routinely develop over forested ridgelines before descending toward the Mekong lowlands. Any of these systems, under the right atmospheric conditions, could produce another event comparable to or exceeding March 22nd. The families in those valleys are not unaware of that risk. They have lived under that sky their entire lives. What they lack is not courage or resilience. Those exist in abundance in communities that have rebuilt after floods, droughts, and storms for generations. What they lack is time. Time to repair before the next storm. Time to build stronger. Time to receive resources that close the gap between a thatched roof and a sky capable of throwing ice. That is the variable that relief organizations, meteorologists, and Lao government planners are now racing against. The storm of March 22, 2026 has passed. The damage it left is documented, even if not yet fully measured. But the season that produced it has not ended, and somewhere above the highland ridges of northern Laos, the atmosphere is still moving, still building, still deciding where it will aim next. Stay safe, stay curious, and keep your eyes on the earth.